Evet efendim.
Well, ladies and gentlemen,
İzninizle birinci günün dördüncü oturumuna
I'm opening the fourth session of the first day of the Congress. Well, we will be talking about why wind sector needs inter-enterprise cooperation.
uluslararası işbirliğine
This is our subject. We will be talking about it.
bu konuyu dile getireceğimiz bir oturum olması için hazırlanmış. Öncelikle
Well, firstly, on behalf of myself and Energy Market Regulatory Authority, I would like to welcome you all.
katılımcılarımıza hoş geldiniz.
And I would like to welcome all of the panelists and participants.
TÜEK oturumunun başlangıcında
Well, today, as mentioned throughout the sessions, Turkey has a high installed power. It's 7 gigawatts. I know it's lower than the potential. It's very low when compared to the potential. It has various reasons. When you ask the participants of the sector, they will all talk about different reasons. But I think especially for the private sector, when you talk to the participants, when you ask to the participants, this is a common complaint. We need a interagency cooperation. We need a cooperation of interagencies here in this wind sector. And today we will be talking about the permits processes. I will giving solid data. We will give international data, and then we will evaluate all of the interagency cooperation. In this session, Güray Erol, İsmail Kuriş, Ebru Arıcı, and Eski Deniz Katmer will be talking about.
hepiniz adına öncelikle tekrar teşekkür ederim.
And I would like to thank all of you,
Bu konularda görüşlerini ifade eden
and I would like to thank all of the panelists for sharing their experience with us today. So, let's start with Güray, and let's open the session.
Çok teşekkür ederim Refik Bey.
Thank you, Refik.
Panelin moderasyonu üstlendiğiniz için de
Well, I would like to thank you for being the moderator of this session.
tüm katılımcılara tekrar hoş
And
geldiniz.
I would like to also welcome all of the participants. I think this panel with all of the colleagues is like a presentation, is like a summary of the last year's spring meetings. And in Ankara, we had a meeting in springs, and with the development of the regulation, with the evolution of the regulation, we are moving on a different process. So why we cannot have a cooperation as we desire? And we have like 10 firms, and we have a study team, and we have a questionnaires of 3 or 4 pages, and then we compiled the data with all of the opinions, and then we had a draft. And our goal in the beginning of the summer was to present it, but actually we couldn't realize it because of the voting process. But I think at the end of this year it will be published. This will be a huge compilation of today and future and the past. What do we need? I think it will be a scientific study. Well, for the interagency cooperation, in my opinion, what we are doing in this wind energy sector, we are trying to reach a limited source, and there is a competition to reach that source. When you are in that competition, actually we are not alone. We are a team from the public sector, private sector. We have lots of shareholders, and it has its own process processes. And at that point, in the process, in the whole process, we have an evolution. And then we are faced with a more layered one. It's not specific for Turkey. It's not easier when you look at the last 10 years. Well, how it's going, I would like to give you an example. In the financement of a wind energy project, in the bank, there is a person actually charged with it, and then you are discussing about the project. I think we should always think about it in a more complex way, because it's moving on to a more complex way. Well, we should turn it to a success, not convert into a chaos, for example. In the last 10 years, we had different paces related to that sector. We have lots of changing megawatts. And when we look at the global figure, the installed wind power is actually up to 500 megawatts. So when we look at the perspective of the 2021, it's 750 megawatts. And actually we are the representatives of that sector. Well, to be honest, when we are talking about the interagency cooperation, the good and bad examples of the international experiences should be combined, should be interpreted all together. Well, apart from that, to make the whole process easier, to facilitate it in each project, we need a private and public sectors cooperation related to the regulation, the cooperation of this process. We need a coordination in private and public sectors. Maybe it's easy to be included in the private sector. And maybe it's easy to see the cooperation in the private sector. Well, I would like to talk to you about a good thing about the private sector. In the wind energy sector, like on behalf of the TWEC, I think we have a good dialogue, especially for the auctions. We shared our thoughts and developments very well. And I think in the improvements, we had a minimum level. Well, regarding the cooperation between the private and public sectors, actually, we are, as the private sector, we are always the blamed ones. Well, I'm talking about the meeting in May, the 16th of May last year. The General Director of the Turkish Energy Board talked about the challenges because they are not cooperated by themselves. I'm not sure if it's the situation today, but the dialogue between the firms and the institutions should be improved. Because in our projects we are actually faced with these challenging processes all the time, and the applications are very different when you compare each project. And actually we are losing time, and I think we need to have a common view in that part. And actually there's a delay related to our national source. And actually, there's a very costly. This costs very much regarding to the energy expenditures. So that's why we need cooperation, interagency cooperation between the public and private sector. Well, we have a competitive movement plans in the private sector, and we need to facilitate it. Like in 2012, you know, the costs related to the wind energy auctions. When you compare to the global auctions, actually the costs were very close to the solar energy. And there's a competitiveness here, a very clear competitiveness. So in Turkey, we actually had a very active 10 years, and I think we shouldn't accept being imbalanced. Thank you. This is what I'm going to say. Thank you for using time very efficiently. I think there's an understanding between Giray. So actually he was very good with the time limitation. Thank you. Giray actually gave a general view related to the private and public sector cooperation. And actually he gave examples and actually he showed us that a general understanding between private and public sector was constructed. And now moving on to a more solid data, I would like to leave the floor to Ismail.
Thank you, distinguished chair. And thank you very much at the same time to TWEC for giving us the opportunity. Since 2007, I've been working in business development in the wind sector. And during this period of time, as you would appreciate, especially while we're developing the WPP projects, there are a couple of indicators that we have to consider. Of course, measuring the wind, of course, assessing the wind. But besides that, of course, you can possibly analyze and make a project assessment and can be predictable. But of course, what is important is how we manage the licensing process. You know, in each and every project, you of course have gained a certain level of experience, but you cannot transfer that experience to another project in the most of the cases. And what I've observed, especially in the last 10 to 11 years, is that there are actually several different agencies that are engaged in the process from one region to the other. And the agencies are changing, they have different functioning, and therefore actually there is no standardization. So it's actually so much challenging us. And maybe the most important thing in here is actually licensing, about the environmental impact assessment, about the development plans and everything. And especially before the maybe development process, maybe with regards to the environmental impact assessment, I have a couple of things to say. As you all know, there are sayings that environmental impact assessment is actually just to get an approval. There's this 56 megawatts that's required. And at this point in time, I mean, looking at the technology, this 50 megawatts is actually no more the case. I mean, once you limit it that way with 20 turbines, I mean, it's nothing for you. It's not possible for you to do anything. So I guess this 50 megawatt limitation should actually be lifted, and we have to base our assessment actually in particular on, for example, 20 turbines. Now, we start the journey with a certain design of a turbine. We get the license, but sometimes the process takes too long. Technology is changing, then we start from scratch again, then we actually start the licensing process once again. It can vary from one to the other, but the process can go up to 6 months. And therefore, during this process, especially maybe about the blade, for example, width tolerance or height tolerance, these actually could be the things that we can consider. Now, about the development plans, I actually have a couple of things to say. You know, we've been doing some of the things in particular simultaneously, geological surveys, technical interaction analysis, and so on. We apply for having a development in a certain area, they start discussing about council. For example, if we are to receive any approval for the forest, then you need to get the approval for this. Then we actually very quickly could manage it, especially from development point of view. But now we apply to the Ministry of again, Environment and Urbanization, but it takes some time for the spatial planning by the ministry. We, for example, have to have our map approved. The geological surveys should be approved. If it is a forest land, then we need a pre-license, especially for the forest. It means that you have to pay for the necessary charges and costs. And then, for example, there is also, for example, the need to give the decision for the interest of the, for example, public. If it's a pastoral land, then you have to change the type of the land. There are several things in this process that you have to complete. But once, for example, you pass all these procedures, but once you're just ending up with the council decision, then you have to start everything from scratch. And all the costs that you pay out of pocket is in vain. And, for example, about changing the pastoral land type, and everything is becoming in vain. And it's just you have different agencies complete unnecessary transactions. Therefore, this development process should start immediately, and the agency opinions should be received immediately. And the files, for example, I don't know, maybe it could be digital application or digital tracking system, and therefore we actually have to be as transparent as possible to the investors. For example, there is a digitalization process. The YEKDEM approvals are received, for example, right now, but it's quite an irresponsible process, I should say, in the energy, market regulatory board. The e-signature requirement, for example. In a development plan approval, there are several copies of one document that you have to make, and then you send them by mail, normal postal mail, and just sometimes, for example, it takes 30 days for one document to reach to an agency, and then there is actually the official time for the reply, 2 months, 3 months. I mean, these are the best options, by the way, and so as to shorten the process, there is a need to have a platform and have actually a one-stop approach. That's what we wish for. And in project approvals, there are new things that people started to demand. For example, the construction permit. It is varying from one region to the other. Some of the regions do not give any construction permit. And I don't know, maybe especially the local governments should be trained on this. I mean, they also have to be trained on the regulation. And especially for the investors in particular, I mean, we have to assure them, we have to facilitate what they're doing. I think it will significantly contribute. That's all I can say.
İfade edeyim, fazla da meşgul etmeyeyim. Teşekkür ediyorum.
Biz teşekkür ederiz İsmail Bey. İsmail Bey.
That's all for my words. Thank you, Ismail. So, Ismail mainly discussed about some of the problems encountered during the development process, especially you mentioned about the digital platform or about the construction permit, and you mentioned about the giving the documents and sending the documents to the agencies. I will just put them at the end. Now I would like to give the floor to Ebru Arıcı. Ebru will briefly, as different from the other panelists, will actually have a presentation and provide us with some data. Yes, the floor is yours.
Bilgisiyle başlamak istiyorum. Bunu yeni hazır.
Well, this is a new one. You know, when we look at the 2017 applications, we had a license, and when we look at the data, 1,051 were actually cancelled. But this is very related to the interagency cooperation. It couldn't be forecasted before. When we look at the auctions, we had some regulations, but this table, I think, shows very well why the cooperation is important. But when we look at the energy market regulation legislation, these are the documents. But the most important thing is the property acquisition, and I will give detail about the property acquisition. Well, we have 5 definitions here. We have private property, we have forest. Well, we have some properties related to the amendment of 33. Well, development plan phase. Well, we have a technical interaction analysis, and we have environmental impact assessment document. And we also have a license related to that property. Now here, this is the investment scheme, and the pink one is the production license. And the definitions, actually, I've mentioned at the first was the first phases. But when you look at this one, as Ismail mentioned earlier, when you look at the first one, it's about minimizing the limitations. What are these? The opinions of the firms and institutions. And as a standardized way, when you are starting with a project, you need a legislation related to the property, because the property can affect your design. And you know that turbine technologies are changing rapidly, and sometimes we have changes related to the property. Well, the cost is important, and other than that, in the first phase, you know, the turbine model is the first preliminary phase, so we need a good mapping. And with the light of these data, you can have an ultimate design of your project. And then with the coordination, we have development processes and property processes. Well, for these processes, you can have a sample project. And to give details, this is from Izmir, Ala. The installed power is 50 megawatts and 50.4 megawatts electricity. And we have 14 turbines, while the blade diameter is 135. 5 of them is included in the forest area, and 4 of them are included in the actually private property. Now, when we come to the evolution of this process, we are on a different process. Actually, we have looked at with the squares, but now it's different. Well, this is a different one that, in terms of the turbine area. In geometric shape, it's different. Well, for all of the projects, I think in all of the changes related to the opinions and approvals and is affected, and also the area size, the permitting procedures, the periods, and the costs actually are affected too. And all of the applications and legislation changes are preliminary of other changes, so it's very important to note that when we look at the area sizes, this is our real construction size. Well, you know, the approved areas, and they have connections with each other. And here, from the sample project, this is the comparison of the years, the approvals, and their costs. You can see in this scheme. Sometimes we have additional costs related to the foresting. We have technical integration analysis. They have started 2017, and we had a 10-year process. When you look at the dollar base in 2017 we have $321. It's changing actually year by year, but now it's still 50 megawatts. And when we look at the first cost is $1,200. It's fixed. And in the pre-license period, we have works to be completed. But we need opinions about institutions related to the forest approvals, like we need approval from the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization. Standardly today we have 6 institutions, and we need an environmental impact assessment document. It's a requirement. Well, for this we have 5 constitutions, and we need also environmental impact assessment documents for the pasture land. And when we look at the publicization and renting, we need also approvals from institutions. We have 4. But we also need environmental impact assessment and from the Ministry of Finance. And we need also controls related to the non-agricultural approval.
So here you can see for the development plan what kind of different agents' opinions are required. For example, it was 7 in 2007. You need to get approval from 7, but now 36 in total. And in one project we have Minister of National Education included, so 37. I mean, up to 37 different agencies that you have to receive opinion. Again, for the approval of the development plan, of course, the prerequisites is depending on the coordination, of course. You need, again, the license, and also you need the actual map, the environmental impact assessment report, approval, geological survey. You need to get the opinions of the agencies, and at the same time, for example, if it's a forest pre-license, if it is going to be used for extra-agricultural purpose, again, you need a decision for this. Also, you need to change the type of the land for the pastoral lands, and at the same time, technical interaction analysis approval as well. Therefore, in the WPP project, we can speak about 14 different agencies, in total 50 different departments that you need to receive approval, get a license, or get an approval for. So that's the last, I guess. I think quite a wrap-up, but I almost mentioned about everything. Yes, I'm sure everyone is very much informed, even myself, I should say. I actually learned new things. So now the last speaker. Let's move. Ezgi. Maybe you can wrap up what we have discussed so far.
Evet. Merhaba. Öncelikle günün bu saatinde son oturum.
Hello, still for being in here on the last session. But I'm very happy that you're still here because this is one of the most important sessions of the day. I could be mistaken in some of the figures, but for a project over 10,000 megawatts, a license was given to our WPP. It is over 7,000 megawatt in operation and almost that much under construction. So I can say we actually have not yet started for construction of some of them because of regulatory problems or those that cannot receive any license or approval. Majority of those 3,000 megawatt of a capacity that's again auctioned. Also the licensing process started, and there is a need for additional capacity for this industry. We need growth, and for this, of course, the license processes in particular should be completed swiftly. And to do so, of course, interagency relation, the relation between the public and the private sector, and of course, interagency coordination, they are all very important to us. Of course, as my colleague stated, especially while we were just doing the study for TWEC, we just thought how the licensing processes in Turkey, what are the points that is problematic for Turkey, and we checked the worldwide cases. Under the auspices of the Energy Ministry, IBRD, at the same time had a joint study and offered some solutions. We also performed certain studies. It's just going to be in the form of a summary, I can say, just to sum up what the other colleagues stated, but three main things that we focus on in here. The first thing is to simplify the licensing process and to decrease the number of the agencies that we actually have to be in contact with. I think in the last 5 to 6 years we didn't do it. On the contrary, we now have more number of agencies that we should be dealing with. It was 3 approvals in the past, now 5. For development plan it was 7, but now it is 37. It's quite obvious that it's actually an obstacle for the projects, because if once you stock up in one agency, then you can have a delay of a year. The second thing, Ismail also discussed about this, having a central authority. I mean, it's again a one-stop shop. Just 90% of the EU member states, there's one single authority, or there are commissions with the representatives of different agencies that the licensing process is completed. It's a more standard approach. I mean, you know what type of file you should prepare and apply for, and that's actually standardization. And the second, as Gral stated, we actually have different agencies, authorities from different agencies, so at the same time interagency coordination is also important. There actually should be some contradictions and conflicts in between them. And the other thing is, of course, to avoid some arbitrary approaches in one region. For example, you can, for example, pay for more development plan fee in one region than in another. And we actually have to receive more approvals. So it's actually a problem for predictability of the projects and the loss of appetite for the investors. The other thing is that, again, especially roughly speaking, actually the investors are knocking one door to the other at different agencies. I mean, for example, I know from one land, for example, it looks, for example, it is in the title deed, it's actually an agricultural land, but a forest land in another local government. I mean, you have to go to the Department for Forestry or to the title deed office to check what the type of the land is. It's important for time and cost. And we actually have several cases in Europe and best practices for this. And another point to mention, and we have already started doing this, within the framework of the regulatory works, I guess it's important to have the other stakeholders in the process and the private sector. I mean, we don't want to wake up in the morning and have a publication in the official gazette, and it's pretty difficult to keep up with this. It's the same for the public sector and the private sector. Therefore, if, for example, there is going to be a new regulation, I think both the private sector and the other agencies should be a part of it. We have to receive their opinion. This is also the case in Europe. There are online portals. They, for example, have workshops, and we are already doing it. And again, the ones after, for example, the regulation for the auction, and several sessions organized with the participation of the private sector. I mean, they even, for example, actually asked and requested us from the private sector, come here and provide us with some feedback about this. And within the framework of ECA, we did it, workshops and the technical specifications, one-to-one meeting with the parties, having received the technical specifications and try to receive opinions for them. And of course, it is important so as to speed up the licensing process and to lift the regulation-specific obstacles, I guess so. Thank you, Ezgi. Now, actually, we have a bunch of time, so So three things that you underline: simplification, having a central authority, a one-stop shop, and lastly, participation of the private sector to the regulatory works. And thank you very much for appreciating the work of the Energy Market Regulatory Board. So now, I guess it's pretty obvious that we have problems in the licensing process. We all complain about this with regards public-to-public relation, public-to-private, and all. So the floor is yours to the audience. Any question you want to ask to the panelists, and time allows. So maybe you can also speak about your solutions. You can offer some solutions. Yeah, floor is yours. So from the very first row, let's start there. Your name and your agency or your company as well, please introduce. Ferdi Türksoy. I'm from a consulting company, owner of a small consulting company, consulting to the WPPs. Thank you to the panelists and the organizers. And you touched upon a very important topic. You know, there are several, obstacles on the road. My question, and maybe I can say it's actually a suggestion as well. Now, trying to have one-stop shop for licensing or to have a consolidated structure for the licensing process, it is maybe a correct way of doing it. But for development, for example, there are 25 to 30 agencies. I mean, it is the investor that should follow this. Normally there it is interagency as much as I know. That's what I'm confused. Or, for example, how correct it is for the private sector to go one agency to the other to do the follow-up for this. But what I feel like to be so important, and the reason why I raise my hand is that I've also experienced a lot, of course, but I guess the sequencing, the order is also important. I mean, maybe we should start with this agency first, and if, for example, something is approved, then I can move to the other agency. Time management, we all have the predecessors, successors, and once there's actually a problem in one, then the entire thing can change. So I'm wondering whether you actually know about, for example, I have to get a license or an approval from this agency first, and then I have to move to the other one. I don't know if I'm clear about my question. That's all. You asked it to whom? Well, anyone. I mean, we have a consulting company here, those who are in the private sector. Anyone, let's say anyone. Okay. Güray, let's start with you. Thank you, Ferdi. Of course, there must be a prioritization, of course. Even if we're not doing it, even if we fail to do so or forget about this according to the licensing regulation, once you get the pre-license, then you actually start schedule, whether we want or not. We, for example, for the technical interaction analysis and so on, and which license to receive from which agency. It's actually just a bunch of things interacting with each other. Of course, it's not only specific to Turkey. In all countries, I mean, there are countries that's been developing WPP projects for the last 2 decades. The projects, once you start today, I'm just doing investments tomorrow. and then I will make money in 2 years' time. It's not the case. It's not the case anywhere. I mean, you know, it's always the projects that are long-term projects. Therefore, almost all the players in the sector first finance with their equity the projects, the project development, and of course it's quite a long period of time for Turkey, and so we have high immunity, but our immunity works like a flu vaccine. According to the strains of the previous year, we are just vaccinated wherever we did it wrong, and then we are actually testing it next year. But of course there could be a change in the regulation, or some agency approaches might vary, or for example now we are the presidential system, change in the name of the ministry structure. The uncertainty, of course, in Turkey makes it much more difficult. So, of course, you are using your equity, you have a certain order for the licensing, but sometimes it may not work. So, to the extent possible, of course, we are trying to overcome the uncertainties. It's not the case only in Turkey. In France, for example, it's actually a country that's been in this for the 10 to 15 years. It's the same also in France. I mean, administrative issues. I think 8 months ago, for example, environmental impact assessment and development plan was approved by the governors, and then these are the two contradicting licenses, and they said it is incorrect for one single agency to do so. So the governors are no more allowed to approve the environmental impact assessment report, and no one is actually appointed for this, and therefore for the last 7 months nothing is done. I mean, if someone, for example, sue you against your environmental impact assessment during this process, then there's no defined governing authority. It's not only the case in Turkey, also elsewhere. So I know it by our competitors as well. I mean, this period of 5 to 7 years can go up to 9, 10 years, so it's no more possible to make an investment. But it's all about the inability to efficiently use the resources of the country, and I believe that must be the number one priority to us.
Teşekkürler Güray Bey.
Thank you, Güray.
Kurum görüşlerini alırken
Well, regarding the opinions of the agencies, we are actually be informed that we are in activation, we are doing something. If there is a problem, of course we are faced with many problems. Sometimes we get opinions, we need opinions from the information and technology agency. It's sometimes needed. It's not included on the list, but sometimes we need the licensing approvals from other firms. We need correspondences, and while doing this correspondences, actually we are faced with opinions regarding the non-structured regulations. We are informed and we are giving information regarding the project. If anything happens, we say that you should always evaluate this on the basis of our project. Well, the Ministry of Forestry has some project. It has some newly developed projects on the face of EIA report. They have some comments, and actually it makes the investor very confused. Well, limitations are important, necessary, but on the phase of the project development, we should be informed about it. We should be informed about it on the area process. Well, let's think about it. You're on the forestry area. You get the licensing, but you know that there were no other agencies before it. But then there might be new developments, new projects, for example, about the lands. if it's not licensed or approved, then you are faced with the challenges of that project. Well, thank you. Ismail, do you have any contributions? Well, you mentioned about our project. Let's talk about our experience. We actually installed the plant, but they said that there will be a land construction here, and we told them that we haven't been informed about it. Opinions, having opinions, approvals were not on the agenda at that time. So we actually faced with an additional challenge at that time. So these kinds of challenges should be limited from the first phase. Well, actually, your question reminded me of something that I have forgotten for a long time ago. Well, for the public sector, it actually has the duty to wrap up, to make the improvements on one roof. Everything should be united, especially in terms of the approvals of the agencies. But some things happen, such as you get the approvals of the agencies, like from 38 agencies. For example, we are talking about the parcels of a treasury. It was installed. So regarding this parcels, you need to rent it. So the Ministry of Finance is dealing with it. And then you need another approval in the city. So why should we actually face with this process again and again? This is an important situation. I think the approvals of the agencies should be united on one roof, and it shouldn't be a reapproval process. Well, thank you, Ismail. Ezgi, do you have any contributions? Well, I would like to give you an example. Well, actually, being on the right phase all the time is not a solution. But sometimes you get a pre-license in 180 days in the area related to the technical interaction analysis. We have an accommodation of a turbine type, and then we are doing the applications. And then for the same turbine areas, we are continuing with the process of the licensing. And then when we do the turbine auction, then the rotor diameter is changed. With a minor change, then we need a reapproval of the technical interaction analysis. But your experience in 1.5 years, the plannings of the agencies can be changed. And the turbine type was approved, but then another turbine type might affect their system. So the process might have to start from all over. So no matter how your plan is well structured, it's not the case. While you are doing the turbine auction, but you have some challenges regarding the signings. With the turbine provider, you might get a negative approval of the technical interaction analysis. You said that it's 4 or 5 months, but actually it's a waste of time because you need to wait to start it. Well, you know, the Energy Market Regulation Agency is thinking about it and dealing with it, but I think it's one of the most challenging process. Well, thank you, Ezgi. While listening to this, I think we have lots of complaints. When you ask a question, you get lots of complaints. Well, as a part of a public sector, I could say that it's a learning process that we are faced with. It's the same in the private sector? Well, our country, Turkey, is a developing country. I think it's because of this developmental process. We cannot be completed our processes in terms of the structural analysis. So the learning process is continuing for the private sector and public sector. So the most important thing is the take-home message for that question is what you should convert what you learn into a regulation, into a legislation, to convert it into a form of life. It's the same for the private and public sector. It's an important fact, I think. Well, any other question? Well, do we have any female participants? If not, then you can ask your question. Well, hello, Orçun Artınbaş. I'm from a research and development unit. Well, you were talking about digitalization. In the recent years, we had the improvement forms. And I think this process was very facilitative. When we look at the energy market regulatory agencies' other documents, will it be the same for other documents? It was one of our main goals. When we get the applications of the 2017, we actually prepared it because it was different. The applications were on the forefront. In this platform, we have another priorities, but 2020 we are planning to get our applications online. Well, I would like to talk to you about the expropriation process. Well, when we look at the first case in the approvals of the Ministry of Agriculture and Energy Market Regulatory Agency, we get the document from Energy Market Regulatory Agency, then it moves on to the other agency. I think we need a improvement relating to the facilitation of that process. It needs to be more quick. You know, you get the support documents before starting your licensing. Well, in the approvals of the Ministry of Agriculture, actually we have to wait for it. But we actually get our support documents from the title, deed of real estate. Well, you know, it's a recent process for us, so I want to underline it. They do not include us in this process. They say to us that you should send that document. The process starts again. Then the document comes back to you at the end. I would like to say that in each processes, the Energy Market Regulatory Agency is included. We are trying to make this process more quick. Well, I cannot give you an exact information relating to the schedule of the approvals, but I would like to say something. Actually, in the recent months, we had a change relating to the electronic notifications, declarations. Well, the Ministry of Justice actually approved it. We are on the phase of getting approvals. I think in 2 months, the declarations declarations between all of the agencies will be online, and it will be more quick. So the related firms, in terms of transparency, what can we do? I don't have an exact information about it for the time being. Well, any other questions or contributions?
Buyurun.
You haven't mentioned it about actually, the process relating to the next month is about TWEC. The approvals of TWEC, how will this process be? What are the recent studies about it? Well, I don't have any exact information, but well, in the hall, do we have anyone? Well, in the renewable energy process, actually the contracts have been started. It's in the phase of the license approval, pre-license approval. But I think it's open to all of the approvals, but I'm not sure. Well, apart from that, do you have any contributions or questions from the hall? Well, we don't have any questions. So let's wrap up this session. We have another participant. Well, I would like to thank you. I'm Tarek from Hippogen Counseling Firm. I would like to talk to you about the licensing process. It's not about the energy investors. It's all related to the investors in all fields. For example, in mine field, we have lots of challenges. I think they are in a worse condition than yours. But here, as all of the panelists underlined that in one point, on one roof, if we can compile all of the approvals, actually it needs lots of requirements. The agencies cannot actually realize it by themselves. For example, one ministry should be powerful, but as energy market regulatory agency, we don't want to be powerful. We need all of the sector to be powerful in itself. But I would like to underline that each firm and each institution needs to have power. So it's very fragmented, and it actually takes lots of years. Well, I wish all of the related institutions should be united and had a common joint session about it. I think we need it. Maybe we could reach to one point, which to a consensus. Well, I think it will be added to the agenda of this Turkish Wind Energy Congress. Well, as our panelists mentioned, the reports have been prepared according to this scheme. I think there are no other questions, so I would like to thank all of you for your participation. And I would like to thank all of the panelists. And on behalf of Turkish Wind Energy Congress, I would like to give you a plaque. Thank you.